The small town of Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where neighbors greeted each other with friendly smiles, and where life moved at a slower, more comforting pace. On the corner of Main Street, nestled between a small bookstore and a flower shop, there was a cozy diner named Sunnyside Diner. The diner had been around for decades. Its red and white checkered tablecloths and warm, golden lights welcoming people from all walks of life. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the scent of homemade pastries created an atmosphere that made the diner feel like a second home to anyone who entered. Among the regulars was Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a gentle, elderly black woman in her late 70s. She had lived in Millbrook her entire life and had watched the town grow and change. Yet some things, like the warm comfort of the Sunnyside Diner, had remained the same. Every morning, she arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, carrying her small brown handbag and wearing a soft, pastel scarf around her shoulders. She always chose the same table by the window, where the morning sunlight streamed in, casting a golden glow on the pages of the newspaper she liked to read. Eleanor was known for her kind heart and her quiet wisdom. She had spent her life helping others, volunteering at local shelters, and tutoring children in the neighborhood. Her soft voice and gentle demeanor earned her respect from everyone she met. People admired her not just for her kindness but for her strength. She had lived through hardships, times when patience and courage had been her only companions, yet she had emerged from them with grace. On this particular morning, the diner was alive with its usual chatter. The clinking of cups and the low hum of conversation filled the space, creating a sense of warmth and community. The owner, Carl, moved between the tables with practiced ease, greeting customers and taking orders. Carl was a friendly man in his 50s, with a welcoming smile that made everyone feel at home. He had known Eleanor for years and always made sure her coffee was ready just the way she liked it, black, with a touch of cinnamon. As Eleanor sipped her coffee and scanned the newspaper, a young man named Tony entered the diner. Tony was loud, brash, and full of self-confidence, the kind of person who seemed to enjoy drawing attention to himself. He had recently moved to Millbrook and was already earning a reputation for being reckless and disrespectful. His leather jacket, flashy sneakers, and loud laughter made it clear he was someone who believed he could do whatever he wanted without facing any consequences. Tony walked past the tables, scanning the diner with a smirk. His eyes landed on Eleanor as she quietly read her newspaper. He felt a twisted sense of amusement at the sight of her calm demeanor. In Tony's mind, older people were weak and easy to provoke. He had no idea that Eleanor Thompson was far from weak, that beneath her gentle exterior lay a lifetime of resilience and strength. As Tony reached the counter, he accidentally brushed against Eleanor's shoulder. She looked up at him with her usual soft smile and said, "Excuse me, young man. I believe you bumped into me." Her voice was calm, polite, and composed, the kind of voice that demanded respect without needing to raise itself. But Tony was not interested in respect. He let out a loud laugh and leaned closer to Eleanor, saying something crude and insensitive about her age and race. The diner went quiet. Patrons turned their heads, some clutching their cups of coffee, others exchanging worried glances. It was not common for anyone to act so brazenly in Sunnyside Diner, and the atmosphere shifted from peaceful to tense in an instant. Eleanor, though momentarily taken aback, remained composed. She adjusted her scarf and responded quietly, "There is no need for rudeness, young man. I hope your day improves." Her words were measured, firm, yet gentle like the quiet strength of a river, flowing steadily, despite the rocks in its path. Tony, however, was fueled by arrogance. He laughed louder, ignoring the curious and nervous stares from the other customers. In his mind, he was performing, showing off his boldness and testing the patience of those around him. Eleanor, who had seen people like Tony before, felt a flicker of irritation, but more than that, she felt a surge of quiet determination. She would not let his disrespect shake her composure. Not in public, not ever. What Tony did not know was that Eleanor Thompson was not just any elderly woman. She was the mother of Vinny Russo, a man whose reputation preceded him even in places where he was never physically present. Vinny was a figure both feared and respected. A man who commanded influence and respect in ways that few could imagine. To outsiders, Eleanor appeared harmless, a kindly woman who enjoyed her coffee and read her newspaper. To those who knew her secret, she was a woman whose family demanded respect and whose connections could not be underestimated. But Eleanor never flaunted her son's identity. She lived a life of quiet dignity, believing that power and influence were not things to be displayed openly but to be used wisely when necessary. She had taught Vinny everything he needed to know about respect, patience, and the importance of protecting family without unnecessary conflict. She believed in handling situations with intelligence and thought, rather than letting anger dictate actions. As Tony continued to taunt her, the tension in the diner grew. Some of the patrons whispered among themselves, unsure whether to intervene or to wait and see what would happen. Carl, the diner owner, stepped closer to the counter, his expression showing both concern and authority. He was about to speak, to tell Tony to leave. When Tony suddenly did something no one expected, he raised his hand and slapped Eleanor across the face. The sound was sharp and shocking, like a crack of thunder in the quiet diner. Cups rattled on the tables, and the patrons froze. Gasps filled the air. Eleanor's newspaper slipped from her hands, fluttering to the floor. And for a moment, there was stunned silence. Tony stood there, a smug grin on his face, thinking he had achieved some twisted form of victory. Eleanor, however, did not scream, did not cry, and did not lash out. She simply pressed a hand to her cheek, took a deep breath, and whispered softly under her breath, "Some lessons come at a high price." Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension in the diner, and the patrons watched in awe as she regained her composure. What Tony did not know, what no one in the diner realized at that moment, was that Vinny Russo had been nearby, handling business matters, and had received a call from his mother describing the incident. Vinny's calm, controlled nature vanished for a brief moment, replaced by a sharp, icy focus. He did not shout. He did not run in. But his mind began calculating the best way to respond. The best way to ensure that justice, quiet, precise, and effective, would be served. Eleanor, for her part, continued to act as if nothing unusual had happened. She adjusted her glasses, picked up her newspaper, and took a sip of her coffee, as if the world had not been shaken by Tony's act of disrespect. Her strength, her patience, and her quiet wisdom radiated from her, leaving the patrons in silent admiration. Even in this moment of public humiliation, Eleanor remained in control not because she was fearless, but because she understood that true power was measured in patience, dignity, and intelligence. She had lived a long life, seen much, and learned that rash actions often led to unnecessary consequences. Tony, on the other hand, had no idea that he had just crossed a line that would soon teach him a lesson he would never forget. As the diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the tension still lingered in the air. People whispered quietly among themselves, and Carl ensured that Tony was asked to leave immediately. Eleanor continued to sit by the window, her presence calm and serene, her eyes reflecting a lifetime of experience and understanding. And far away, yet very near in influence and intention, Vinny Russo began to plan, not out of anger, but out of a deep respect for his mother. He knew that Tony's actions required a response, a lesson that would be delivered with precision and intelligence. And though Eleanor did not know the exact details of what her son would do, she trusted that justice would be served, not through public spectacle or violence, but through wisdom, careful planning, and the quiet power of respect. The moment Tony slapped Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a wave of shock rippled through the diner. For a few seconds, it seemed as if time had frozen. Cups trembled on the tables, and conversations halted mid-sentence. Patrons stared, wide-eyed, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch what would unfold. The diner had always been a place of calm, a sanctuary where people came to enjoy simple pleasures. But in that instant, the sense of peace was shattered. Eleanor's hand rose slowly to her cheek. The sting of the slap surprised her, but it did not break her spirit. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She could feel the heat rising to her face, a natural response, but she refused to let it control her. Instead, she straightened her posture, adjusted her scarf, and, in the softest voice she could manage, whispered under her breath, "Some lessons come at a high price." Her calmness in the face of such blatant disrespect only amplified the tension. Tony, meanwhile, laughed loudly, believing his act of aggression had earned him some twisted kind of admiration. He strutted around the diner, expecting people to be impressed, to perhaps even cheer him on. But all he saw were shocked faces and hesitant glances. The atmosphere was thick with disbelief. Even the owner, Carl, a man who had seen his fair share of rude behavior over the years, looked stunned. His usually gentle voice was sharp as he called out, "That's enough! Get out of here, now!" Tony, undeterred, smirked and ignored Carl, thinking of the confrontation as a game, one where he was winning. He had no understanding that Eleanor Thompson was not just an ordinary elderly woman. She had endured hardships that few could imagine, and she carried with her a quiet strength that had been honed over decades. As Tony turned to leave, Eleanor's eyes followed him, calm, yet intense. There was no anger in her gaze, only an unwavering presence that seemed to pierce through the bravado of the young man. She knew that what he had done was not just disrespectful, it was reckless. And while she did not retaliate in the moment, she understood the importance of consequences, not just for him, but for anyone who thought that such behavior could go unchallenged. What Tony did not know, and what none of the diner patrons could have imagined, was that Eleanor's son, Vinny Russo, was nearby at the time. Vinny was a man whose reputation was known even outside the city. He was respected, feared, and admired in equal measure. And he had built a life that required intelligence, strategy, and careful planning. Vinny was not a man to act impulsively, but he had a deep sense of loyalty to his family, and he had been raised to defend those he loved, without hesitation. When Eleanor called Vinny later that morning to recount what had happened, her voice remained calm, composed, and unshaken. Yet, Vinny could hear the underlying firmness in her tone, the quiet assertion that some actions, even small ones, could not be ignored. He listened carefully, absorbing every detail. The way Tony had entered the diner, the crude words he had spoken, and the audacity of the slap itself. Vinny did not react with anger immediately. Instead, he allowed the words to settle in his mind, analyzing the situation from every angle. He knew that a hasty reaction could escalate matters unnecessarily. In his world, patience was a strength, and precision was more powerful than brute force. He instructed Eleanor to remain calm, to continue her routine as if nothing had happened, and to let him handle the matter quietly. Eleanor agreed, trusting her son's judgment completely. Meanwhile, back at the diner, Tony's behavior had left a lingering unease. Patrons whispered among themselves, speculating about the incident. Some offered Eleanor polite reassurances, asking if she was all right, while others shook their heads in disbelief at Tony's audacity. The diner owner, Carl, ensured that Tony was asked to leave and promised Eleanor that he would not allow such behavior to happen again. Eleanor, true to her character, accepted the apologies from the onlookers with grace. She resumed her seat by the window, picked up her newspaper, and sipped her coffee as if nothing had occurred. Her composure impressed the other patrons, who admired the way she carried herself despite the public humiliation. There was a quiet dignity in Eleanor that commanded respect without demanding it, a presence that reminded everyone that true strength often lay in patience and self-control. As the morning wore on, Vinny began to implement a plan. He did not act out of anger or desire for revenge. Instead, he aimed to teach Tony a lesson in a way that would leave a lasting impression. Vinny's approach was subtle, strategic, and deliberate. He knew that the goal was not to humiliate Tony publicly or escalate the situation in a way that could harm innocent people, but to ensure that the young man understood the consequences of his actions. Vinny's first step was information. He assigned trusted associates to observe Tony quietly, tracking his habits, routines, and interactions. They reported back in detail, noting every movement, every encounter, and every opportunity to deliver a subtle but meaningful message. It was important that Tony did not realize immediately who was behind the events, as the element of surprise would increase the impact of the lesson. Tony, unaware of the attention on him, continued his daily life, believing that the incident at the diner was just another moment of rebellion, another act that would be forgotten in the passing days. He remained brash, confident, and entirely unprepared for the consequences that were quietly taking shape around him. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued to maintain her routine. She visited the grocery store, chatted with neighbors, and stopped by the library to return a stack of books. Every interaction was carried out with her usual warmth and kindness, a stark contrast to the chaos Tony had attempted to create. She never mentioned her son's involvement, nor did she hint at the power and influence that surrounded her. To the casual observer, she was simply an elderly woman enjoying her day. But beneath Eleanor's calm exterior was a sense of quiet satisfaction. She knew that justice, when guided by wisdom and patience, had a way of arriving without the need for anger or force. She trusted that her son's strategy would not only protect her dignity but also provide Tony with an unforgettable lesson in respect and humility. Throughout the day, Tony began to notice small, subtle changes around him. He received unexpected phone calls from strangers offering warnings or advice. People he had considered friends started acting distant, avoiding him without explanation. Minor setbacks began to appear in his personal projects, and small humiliations seemed to occur at every turn. Tony's confidence, once unshakable, began to waver. He felt a creeping unease but could not understand why. By the evening, the weight of these events started to affect Tony more than he expected. He found himself reflecting on his actions at the diner, remembering the calm, composed demeanor of Eleanor, and the way her words had carried a quiet authority. It was unsettling for him to realize that someone, somewhere, had noticed his behavior and was responding in ways he could not predict. Eleanor, meanwhile, prepared dinner at home, her day continuing as usual. She shared a few light-hearted moments with neighbors and friends, always smiling, always polite, always composed. Her strength lay not in confrontation, but in her ability to maintain dignity and patience, even in the face of public disrespect. She knew that the lesson Tony needed was being delivered, carefully and effectively, and that no further action on her part was necessary. As night fell over Millbrook, the town returned to its familiar calm. The streets were quiet, the shops closed, and the diner sat empty, bathed in the soft glow of its neon sign. Tony, however, could not find peace. He lay awake, replaying the events of the morning in his mind, feeling the first stirrings of humility and reflection. He was beginning to understand that actions, even small ones, carried consequences, and that underestimating the strength of others could lead to unexpected and unwelcome outcomes. And so, the day ended not with anger or chaos, but with quiet tension, subtle reflection, and the unspoken power of patience, strategy, and wisdom. Eleanor Thompson's morning had been disrupted, yes, but her composure and dignity remained intact, serving as a reminder that strength often reveals itself most clearly in moments of calm. Tony, unknowingly, had begun a journey of understanding and respect, guided by forces far greater than his own reckless impulses. In the days that followed the incident at Sunnyside Diner, the town of Millbrook seemed to return to its usual rhythm. The streets were quiet, the shops bustled as usual, and the mornings at the diner were filled with the same comforting aroma of coffee and baked goods. Yet beneath the surface of everyday life, a subtle tension lingered, one that few people could put into words. Something had changed. Tony, the young man who had caused such a stir, was beginning to feel it, though he didn't understand why. Tony had always been impulsive, brash, and self-assured. He believed that his actions had little consequence, that the world would bend to accommodate his arrogance. But in the days following the slap at the diner, a quiet unease began to grow inside him. Small events seemed to challenge his sense of control. A friend he expected to meet canceled at the last minute. A plan he had made went wrong in ways that seemed almost orchestrated. Strangers gave him strange, knowing looks. Even his own confidence began to waver. None of this, of course, was accidental. Vinny Russo, had begun to take action. though not in ways that anyone outside his circle could easily recognize. Vinny did not confront Tony directly. He did not storm into the diner or demand an apology. That was not his style. Vinny was intelligent, patient, and strategic. He understood that the best lessons were the ones that left a lasting impression. The lessons that were absorbed quietly, often through the consequences of one's own choices, rather than through force or intimidation. Vinny assigned his most trusted associates to keep an eye on Tony. They watched his movements, his daily routines, and his interactions with friends, family, and even strangers. Every detail was noted carefully. They observed Tony's habits, learned his schedule, and noted the places he frequented. The goal was not to scare him, but to make him understand, in a subtle and unforgettable way, that disrespectful actions carried consequences. Meanwhile, Tony continued his life as if nothing had happened, though the creeping unease was beginning to affect him. He started noticing that things were not going as smoothly as they usually did. A job opportunity he had been excited about fell through unexpectedly. Friends who had once been close now seemed distant or hesitant around him. Small misfortunes, seemingly minor on their own, began to accumulate, leaving Tony frustrated and confused. He could not understand why his life felt suddenly unsettled. At home, Eleanor Thompson continued her routine with the calm and grace that had always defined her life. She visited neighbors, ran errands, and maintained her composure in every situation. Her home was modest but warm, filled with memories of a long life well lived. Photographs of family and friends lined the walls, a testament to the love and care she had shared with those around her. To anyone visiting, she seemed like the kind, elderly woman she always appeared to be. But beneath her calm exterior, Eleanor felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the lessons her son had planned were unfolding exactly as intended. Eleanor's connection with Vinny was unique. She had raised him with patience, wisdom, and the understanding that strength was not measured by force alone. She taught him that true power came from strategy, intelligence, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Vinny had carried these lessons into adulthood, and now, as he observed Tony's behavior from a distance, he understood how to apply them with precision. Tony, for his part, began to reflect more deeply than he had ever done before. The incident at the diner, once dismissed as a minor act of mischief, began to weigh on him. He replayed Eleanor's calm demeanor in his mind, the way she had remained composed even after the slap, the quiet authority in her voice, the subtle hint that she would not tolerate disrespect. It was unsettling for him to realize that someone so gentle could hold such strength. As the week progressed, the small disruptions in Tony's life became more pronounced. A car he had relied on broke down at the most inconvenient time. A minor business deal failed unexpectedly. People he had trusted offered advice that seemed laced with caution or hidden warnings. Tony could not shake the feeling that he was being watched, that his actions were being monitored and assessed by someone far more capable than he had imagined. Eleanor, meanwhile, continued to live her life with dignity. She did not gloat, she did not brag, and she did not hint at the power her son wielded. To the outside world, she was simply a grandmother, enjoying her mornings, running errands, and engaging with neighbors. But those who observed her closely could sense an inner strength, a quiet authority that commanded respect, even without a word. Vinny understood the importance of timing. He knew that acting too quickly could escalate the situation unnecessarily, and he was careful to allow Tony to face the consequences of his actions in a way that was both impactful and controlled. Vinny's strategy relied on subtle influence, rather than direct confrontation. By allowing small challenges to accumulate in Tony's life, he ensured that the young man would internalize the lesson, realizing that disrespect and recklessness could have lasting consequences. Tony, increasingly unsettled, began to notice patterns he could not explain. Opportunities he had taken for granted were no longer available. People he had relied on were suddenly hesitant or distant. Small mistakes seemed to multiply, creating frustration and confusion. For the first time, Tony began to consider that his actions might have consequences far beyond what he had imagined. Eleanor, observing these subtle shifts from her quiet home, felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that the lesson was being learned, that the young man who had caused her public humiliation was beginning to understand the importance of respect, patience, and awareness. She continued to go about her daily routine, her composure unwavering, her presence calm and reassuring to those around her. Throughout Millbrook, whispers of the incident at the diner persisted. Patrons of Sunnyside Diner still spoke quietly about the audacity of Tony and the calm resilience of Eleanor Thompson. But while the town speculated, few could imagine the quiet, calculated measures being taken to ensure that justice, in its most subtle form, was unfolding. The lesson was not delivered through confrontation or fear, but through careful observation, strategic planning, and the natural consequences of one's own actions. By the end of the week, Tony's attitude had begun to shift. The initial arrogance and reckless confidence that had led him to slap Eleanor were replaced by a cautious awareness. He noticed how easily things could go wrong when he acted without thought. How quickly the world seemed to respond to his behavior in ways he could not control. The lesson was becoming clear, though he still did not know the source of the influence guiding it. Eleanor, as always, remained composed. She prepared meals, visited neighbors, and spent time reading in her favorite chair by the window. Her presence was a quiet reminder of strength and dignity, a contrast to the chaos that had briefly entered the diner that morning. She understood that true influence was not always visible, that the most powerful lessons were often those delivered quietly, without spectacle, and with patience. Vinny continued to monitor the situation from afar, satisfied with the way events were unfolding. He knew that Tony was beginning to learn the value of respect, the importance of thinking before acting, and the consequences that come from underestimating others. Vinny's approach was methodical, ensuring that the lesson was absorbed deeply and permanently, rather than temporarily. As night fell over Millbrook, the town once again settled into its familiar calm. The streets were quiet, the shops closed, and the diner sat empty under the soft glow of its lights. Tony lay awake, replaying the week in his mind, feeling a mixture of frustration, unease, and slowly growing humility. For the first time, he began to understand that actions have consequences, and that people he had dismissed as powerless could, in fact, command influence in ways he could not imagine. Eleanor, as she prepared for bed, reflected on the events of the week with calm satisfaction. The world had not seen the full measure of her influence, but she knew that respect had been re-established, that lessons had been learned, and that patience and wisdom had prevailed. In her quiet home, she felt the satisfaction of knowing that justice, subtle, controlled, and thoughtful, had been achieved. And so, the town of Millbrook returned to its familiar rhythm, unaware of the careful orchestration that had unfolded behind the scenes. Tony had begun to understand the power of respect and consequence. Eleanor continued her life with quiet dignity, and Vinny, observing from a distance, ensured that the lesson was complete, delivered not with anger, but with intelligence, patience, and the enduring strength of family loyalty. Tony's life had changed in subtle but unmistakable ways over the past week. The brash confidence that had allowed him to enter the Sunnyside Diner and slap Eleanor Thompson without hesitation had begun to crumble. Every day brought a new set of small setbacks that left him frustrated, confused, and increasingly aware that his actions had consequences he had never considered. It was as though an invisible force was guiding events around him, teaching him lessons he could not yet fully understand. A minor incident at work left Tony feeling humiliated. He had been scheduled to present an idea to his colleagues, something he had worked on for days, expecting praise and recognition, but everything seemed to go wrong. A projector failed at the worst moment. His notes were misplaced, and a colleague unexpectedly challenged his plan in front of the team. Tony had always believed he could charm or intimidate others into supporting him, but this time, nothing worked. The embarrassment stung, and for the first time in his life, Tony considered the possibility that he might not be in control. At home, small frustrations continued to mount. A car he relied on broke down just when he needed it most. A package he expected to arrive on time was delayed. Friends he had taken for granted began to act distant, avoiding interactions without explanation. Tony felt isolated, unsure of what was happening or why. The events seemed to be random at first, but slowly, patterns began to emerge. leaving him with an unsettling sense of being watched. Meanwhile, Eleanor Thompson continued her life with the calm dignity that had always defined her. She visited the grocery store, exchanged smiles with neighbors, and spent quiet afternoons reading in her favorite chair by the window. She never hinted at the presence or influence of her son, Vinny Russo. To the outside world, Eleanor appeared to be a kind, elderly woman, gentle and harmless. But those who truly understood her knew that she carried a quiet strength, and that her family, particularly her son, commanded respect and influence in ways that were far from ordinary. Vinny, for his part, remained the unseen force guiding the unfolding events. He did not act impulsively or with anger. He did not seek to harm Tony, nor did he wish to escalate the situation unnecessarily. Instead, he orchestrated subtle interventions designed to teach Tony the value of respect and awareness. Each misfortune, each setback, was calculated, delivered in a way that allowed Tony to internalize the lesson rather than feel attacked. Tony's friends began to notice the change in him. The once loud, confident young man had become cautious, hesitant, and reflective. Conversations that had previously been dominated by jokes and arrogance now included pauses and careful consideration. Tony was starting to realize that the world did not bend to his whims, and that people he had underestimated could, in fact, influence events in ways he had never imagined. One afternoon, Tony tried to meet a friend at a local cafe. When he arrived, his friend greeted him with a polite but distant demeanor, mentioning that he was busy and could only stay a few minutes. During their brief meeting, Tony felt a subtle tension, a sense that his presence was being measured, observed, and noted. The encounter left him uneasy. For the first time, Tony wondered if the incident at the diner might have lasting consequences beyond what he had imagined. Meanwhile, Eleanor maintained her usual routine. She prepared meals, checked in with neighbors, and carried herself with the same calm composure that had always defined her. She did not need to intervene directly. She had faith in her son's ability to guide events with precision and patience. Eleanor understood that true power was not about confrontation or immediate retaliation, but about careful planning and measured response. Tony began to notice that small inconveniences were happening repeatedly, almost as if someone was intentionally guiding them. Items he needed for daily tasks seemed to be unavailable at the worst times. Plans he made fell through unexpectedly. Even casual conversations with strangers seemed to carry subtle warnings or advice. Each incident, though minor on its own, created a cumulative effect that left Tony increasingly cautious and reflective. At the same time, Vinny monitored the situation carefully. He understood that Tony needed to face the consequences of his actions without realizing that the lesson was being orchestrated. By allowing natural setbacks to occur, he ensured that the young man would internalize the importance of respect, awareness, and patience. Vinny's approach was methodical and precise, reflecting the lessons his mother had instilled in him over the years. Tony's reflection deepened as the days went by. He remembered Eleanor's calm demeanor at the diner, her quiet words that had carried so much authority, and the way she had handled the situation with grace. Unlike him, she had maintained her dignity without resorting to anger or confrontation. Tony began to understand that strength did not always come from aggression, but from composure, intelligence, and patience. The cumulative effect of these subtle interventions began to reshape Tony's behavior. He became more careful in his actions, more considerate in his interactions, and more aware of the potential consequences of his choices. Where once he had acted impulsively and without thought, he now paused and reflected, questioning how his actions might affect others. It was a transformation that was gradual, but undeniable. Eleanor observed the changes with quiet satisfaction. She did not boast about her son's involvement, nor did she reveal the strategies that were guiding Tony's transformation. Instead, she continued her life with grace, understanding that the most powerful lessons were often the ones delivered quietly, without spectacle, and with patience. Her faith in her son's judgment and abilities was absolute, and she trusted that the situation would reach a natural resolution in time. As the week progressed, Tony faced additional challenges that further reinforced the lesson. A minor misunderstanding at work escalated into a situation where he had to apologize and take responsibility for his actions. Friends he had relied on began to set boundaries, reminding him that respect was earned and not taken for granted. Even casual encounters in public spaces seemed to reinforce the importance of humility and awareness. Through it all, Tony's understanding of respect and consequence deepened. He began to see that actions, even those that seemed trivial or harmless, could have far-reaching effects. The incident at the diner, once dismissed as a moment of bravado, had become a catalyst for personal growth, guiding him toward a greater awareness of his behavior and its impact on others. Eleanor continued to embody the values she had always lived by: patience, dignity, and quiet strength. She understood that true influence was not about confrontation or force, but about guiding others toward understanding through wisdom and example. Tony's transformation, she knew, was a testament to the power of careful guidance, strategic thinking, and the enduring strength of family bonds. By the end of the week, Tony's demeanor had shifted significantly. The arrogance and recklessness that had defined him were replaced by caution, reflection, and a growing sense of humility. He had begun to internalize the lessons that Eleanor and Vinny had orchestrated, recognizing the importance of respect, patience, and thoughtful action. Millbrook returned to its familiar rhythm, the streets quiet and the shops bustling as usual. Sunnyside Diner continued to welcome patrons with the same comforting aromas and friendly service. Yet beneath the surface, subtle changes had occurred. Tony had begun to understand the weight of his actions. Eleanor had maintained her dignity and composure, and Vinny had ensured that justice, careful, measured, and effective, had been delivered without public spectacle or unnecessary conflict. In the calm of her home, Eleanor reflected on the week's events with quiet satisfaction. She had maintained her routine, her composure, and her dignity, and she had trusted her son to guide the necessary responses with intelligence and precision. The lesson had been learned, not through force or fear, but through careful planning, patience, and the natural consequences of one's own choices. Tony, meanwhile, began to carry the memory of the incident with him. The young man who had once acted without thought or consideration had started to change, recognizing the importance of respect and awareness in ways he could not have imagined before that fateful morning at the diner. He was beginning to understand that life had a way of teaching lessons that were both subtle and powerful, lessons that would stay with him for a lifetime. And so, the town of Millbrook settled into its familiar rhythm, unaware of the careful orchestration behind the scenes. Tony had begun his journey toward greater awareness and humility. Eleanor had preserved her dignity and composure, and Vinny, observing from a distance, had ensured that the lesson was complete, delivered thoughtfully, strategically, and with the enduring power of family loyalty. In the weeks following the incident at the Sunnyside Diner, life in Millbrook slowly returned to its quiet, familiar rhythm. The streets were lined with trees swaying gently in the breeze, the shops opened their doors with the same welcoming energy, and the diner continued to be a place where locals gathered to share stories, enjoy coffee, and escape the busyness of life. Yet beneath the calm surface, the echoes of what had happened that morning remained. The story of Tony's impulsive act and Eleanor Thompson's calm dignity had quietly spread through the town, though few knew the full truth. Tony, the young man whose arrogance had led him to slap an elderly woman in public, had changed in ways he could hardly have imagined. The subtle lessons orchestrated by Eleanor's son, Vinny Russo, had taken root. The small misfortunes, unexpected setbacks, and subtle warnings that had followed him in the days after the diner incident were no longer just confusing. They were transformative. Tony's once reckless confidence had been replaced by cautious thoughtfulness. He began to notice the weight of his actions, the importance of respect, and the consequences that came with underestimating others. Each day, Tony reflected more on Eleanor's calm composure at the diner. Her gentle voice, her steady hands, and her unwavering dignity had made an impression that could not be erased. He remembered the moment she whispered, "Some lessons come at a high price," and it echoed in his mind. At first, he had dismissed her words as simply a motherly response to being disrespected. But now, he realized they were far more profound. They were a warning, a lesson in patience, dignity, and strength. Tony began making changes in his own life. At work, He listened more than he spoke. He thought carefully before taking action or making decisions. He apologized when necessary and recognized the contributions of others, instead of trying to dominate conversations or situations. Friends and colleagues noticed the change. Where once Tony had been brash and demanding, he now approached interactions with humility and consideration. Though the transformation was gradual, it was undeniable. At home, Tony also reflected on his personal behavior. He began to understand that relationships, whether with friends, family, or strangers, required respect and care. He realized that his arrogance and impulsiveness had alienated people, and that thoughtful actions and words carried far more power than aggression or bravado. Tony's inner world was shifting. He felt a mixture of humility, awareness, and a growing sense of responsibility. Meanwhile, Eleanor Thompson continued her life with the same calm dignity that had always defined her. She visited neighbors, maintained her routines, and engaged in small acts of kindness that reflected her lifelong commitment to compassion. She never mentioned Vinny's interventions, nor did she boast about the subtle lessons unfolding in Tony's life. To anyone observing, she remained a gentle, elderly woman who loved her mornings, her tea, and her books. But beneath her quiet exterior, Eleanor felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had maintained her dignity in the face of public disrespect, and she had trusted that her son's guidance would ensure justice, without spectacle or harm. Vinny, watching from a distance, felt a sense of completion. He had guided the events carefully, ensuring that Tony would learn the lessons he needed to learn without unnecessary confrontation. Every setback, every minor challenge, and every subtle intervention had been deliberate. Vinny's approach was not about intimidation or fear, but about strategic guidance and the quiet assertion of consequences. He understood that the most enduring lessons were those that were internalized, those that changed a person from within. Tony's final reckoning came one afternoon when he returned to the diner, the place where it all had begun. He walked in quietly, expecting to be met with whispers or judgment, but instead, he found Eleanor sitting calmly by the window, sipping her coffee and reading her newspaper. Her expression was serene, her demeanor unchanged. Tony felt a wave of humility wash over him. He approached her table cautiously, unsure of how to address what had happened weeks before. Eleanor looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger, no scolding, only a quiet acknowledgement of the situation. Tony, feeling the weight of his actions, spoke first. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, his voice sincere. I'm sorry for what I did that day. I had no right to treat you that way, and I understand now how wrong I was." Eleanor regarded him for a moment, her calm gaze steady. "Thank you for saying that," she replied softly. "It takes courage to recognize when you've done wrong. Remember, Tony, respect is earned, and actions have consequences. But it's never too late to make the right choices." Tony nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and humility. For the first time, he truly understood the power of dignity, patience, and awareness. The slap, the misfortunes, and the subtle guidance from Vinny had all led him to this moment of reflection. He realized that strength was not about aggression, but about the ability to think, reflect, and act responsibly. Eleanor returned to her reading, her presence calm and unshakable. Tony sat quietly at a nearby table, contemplating the lessons he had learned. The diner, once a place of conflict and tension for him, now felt peaceful, a reminder of the growth he had achieved and the respect he now understood he owed to others. In the days that followed, Tony's transformation became more evident to those around him. He approached interactions with thoughtfulness, listened carefully to the perspectives of others, and acted with humility and consideration. Friends who had once distanced themselves began to reconnect, noticing the genuine change in his character. Tony had learned that respect, patience, and awareness were not just moral ideals but practical guides for living a better, more meaningful life. Eleanor continued her routine, visiting the diner on quiet mornings, greeting neighbors, and engaging with the community in small but meaningful ways. Her calm presence served as a reminder to everyone around her that strength and dignity often manifest in quiet, steady ways. Not through force or spectacle, she never mentioned Vinny's role in guiding Tony's transformation, and no one suspected the careful orchestration that had ensured justice and reflection. Vinny, observing from afar, was satisfied that the lesson had been fully delivered. Tony had learned humility, respect, and the importance of thoughtful action. Eleanor's dignity had been preserved, and the integrity of the situation remained intact. The balance of justice, delivered with patience and wisdom, had been achieved without harm, confrontation, or public spectacle. The story of the incident at the diner, though whispered quietly among townspeople, became a subtle reminder in Millbrook of the importance of respect and kindness. While Tony had been the one to act impulsively, he was now the one quietly teaching himself lessons in humility and awareness. Eleanor's grace and patience, combined with Vinny's careful guidance, ensured that the lesson would last a lifetime. As months passed, Tony became known not for his arrogance or recklessness, but for his thoughtful and considerate nature. People respected him not out of fear, but because they saw the genuine change in his character. Eleanor continued to live her life with quiet dignity. Her mornings filled with tea, reading, and friendly conversation. Vinny, satisfied that the lesson had been learned, remained a silent guardian, ensuring that the balance of respect and consequence was maintained. Millbrook continued its quiet rhythm, with the diner at its heart, serving coffee, comfort, and quiet lessons in human behavior. Tony's transformation stood as proof that even impulsive actions could lead to meaningful growth when guided by patience, dignity, and thoughtful guidance. Eleanor Thompson's calm and unwavering presence reminded the town that true strength often lies in composure, wisdom, and the ability to act with integrity. In the end, respect, not fear or intimidation, was the ultimate victory. Tony had learned the power of humility and consideration. Eleanor had maintained her dignity. Vinny had ensured that justice was delivered in a measured and intelligent way. And the people of Millbrook, though unaware of all the details, felt the subtle but lasting impact of the events. A quiet reminder that actions have consequences, and that kindness, patience, and thoughtfulness can triumph even in the face of disrespect. The town moved forward, peaceful and steady, with the story of the diner incident quietly shaping the behavior and character of those who remembered it. Tony's journey from arrogance to humility, Eleanor's steadfast dignity, and Vinny's careful orchestration together created a story of lessons learned, respect earned, and the enduring strength of family loyalty. And so, life continued in Millbrook, calm, warm, and full of quiet wisdom, where every action mattered, every choice had meaning, and every individual had the opportunity to grow, learn, and find their own path to respect and integrity.